Hello there, I am Linda Booklady, and I'm going to tell you about some nonfiction books that I read and what I thought of them. So, as of last December 26th, I finished, finally, The Story of Mankind by Hendrik, Willem van Loon. Just finished it December 26th, gave it 5 stars, and I read it because it was a Newbery book. It was actually the first Newbery winner from 1922. So, I thought it was very well researched, and sort of he raced through the European history of millions of lives lost in horrible wars over things that shouldn't have been fought over, and anyhow, glad I got through it, and I can check that one off my list. So the next book that I read last winter, January 9th is when I finished reading it. It's Beautiful Country by Julie Wang. And I'm not going to try to pronounce her first name because she made a point in her memoir of saying that people always mispronounce it. And I'm sure I would be one of them if I tried. I gave it 4 stars. It was an excellent memoir, except for too much information on some things I would rather not have read about. So it lost a star because of that. Otherwise, it was a very interesting memoir about a young girl who came to America from China with her 2 parents. They were teachers and I guess had good jobs over in China, but when they got here they weren't able to find good jobs, and the whole family suffered from poverty for a long time. Very interesting book, and I want to thank the Goodreads giveaway program for that book and the publisher for choosing me to win a copy of the book. So the next nonfiction book I read after that, I finished on January 10th. It's Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. Gave it 5 stars. What a great book. It was a very short book, 3 parts to that book. The first part was about his experience as an inmate at Auschwitz and another concentration camp during the World War II, and the other 2 parts were about his psychology, methodology, I could say. It was a very interesting book. I enjoyed reading it. He, before the war, was already a psychiatrist, and he specialized in helping people who were considering suicide. So when he was in the concentration camps, he observed people who were thinking of giving up. They just gave up on life, and they demonstrated a certain set of indicators so that he could tell it was coming before it came. And he used that in his psychology when he was finally able to be free. The next nonfiction book I want to tell you about is Somebody Someday, A Journey of Homelessness, Faith and Friendship by Joye Holmes. Finished it January 15, and I gave it 5 stars. It wasn't very long, but it was very interesting. So Joye Holmes was in Georgia visiting when she lost her purse or wallet, and then a homeless man found it in a dumpster and returned it to her. And they started corresponding and continued corresponding for over 20 years. So she collected some of his correspondence as a homeless man and put it in this book so that people could read what he was thinking about. And then the next nonfiction book I want to tell you about, I just found it as a free ebook on Amazon because it is like from the 1600s. So it's a really old book, but it's called The Narrative of the Captivity and Restoration of Mrs. Mary Rowlandson. I finished it January 18th, gave it 5 stars. So the story is that back on February 10th, 1676 in Lancaster, Massachusetts, some warriors from Indian tribes, Native Americans, came to their town and attacked them and took some of the people captive. And Mary Rowlandson was one of the people they took captive, her and one of her children. I think they got more than one of her children, but she was with one of them, and then the others were held elsewhere. So she was a Puritan, and there were biblical references in this book because of her beliefs, and by great good fortune somebody gave her a Bible while she was a captive. So I was fascinated by that book. I actually read it in just one day. I couldn't put it down, and very impressed by what she said and what she went through and everything that happened to her. So a lot of people in the comments on Goodreads were very negative towards her, in part because of her Christianity, and in part because they just didn't believe her story. But the thing was, the attack of the Native Americans on her town wasn't just an isolated incident. They didn't just show up and attack for no reason, which it really does seem that way if you just go by what she wrote in her book. But the fact was that she was writing that book for people who already knew the rest of the story, which was that there was a war going on. It was called King Philip's War in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and the Native Americans were retaliating for an attack on one of their villages in December, and like a whole village of Native Americans was wiped out. So the attack on Lancaster, Massachusetts was not just out of the blue for no reason. So the next nonfiction book I want to tell you about is American Lightning, Terror Mystery, The Birth of Hollywood and the Crime of the Century by Howard Blum. Finished it February 2nd, gave it 4 stars. This was a very interesting book about the bombing of the Los Angeles Times building back in 1910. The thing was that with this book, I guess to make it a little bit thicker, he included this information about the birth of Hollywood, which really didn't have that much to do with the Los Angeles Times bombing. The bombing was done because the Los Angeles Times refused to pay union wages, and all the other newspapers in the area did actually cooperate with the unions. Los Angeles Times wouldn't do it. The bombing was done by dynamite, and so there was a detective who researched all this and found the culprits after a long time. But the birth of Hollywood, I don't know, it's just kind of thrown in there for no reason. And it was interesting, but I just felt like it didn't belong in the book. And about it being the crime of the century, I mean, that's a little bit hard to tell when it's 1910. The century is only 10 years old. And there was another 90 years in the century, which during that time there was a lot of terrible crimes. So I don't know about calling it the crime of the century. I thought that was a stretch. Still a very interesting book, and before I read this book, I didn't know anything about the bombing of the Los Angeles Times building. And you can see pictures of that before and after the bombing on the internet. And the next book that I read was by C.S. Lewis. It's A Grief Observed. Finished it February 15th, gave it 5 stars. It was about C.S. Lewis. These were journals that he wrote during the time he was recovering from the shock and grief and misery of his wife's passing. So it was just mainly a philosophical, sort of a rambling dialogue. And I don't know why I gave it 5 stars, but I guess I've been grieving because I lost a friend last year, and my brother-in-law as well. So I wanted to read and see what it said. And the next nonfiction book that I read was A Quaker Book of Wisdom, Life Lessons in Simplicity, Service, and Common Sense by Robert Lawrence Smith. February 28th, 4 stars. I finished it February 28th and I gave it 4 stars. I was not happy with this book because it was not respectful of the Bible, and I'm a Christian. However, it was pretty interesting about what Quakers believe, and I would say mainly it was just common sense things like simplicity and yeah. The last nonfiction book I read last winter was by a woman who used to live in the community that I now live in. She has moved on and lives in Idaho. However, she wrote 3 memoirs, and this was her 3rd memoir, Shadows on the Klamath, A Woman in the Woods by Louise Wagenknecht. Finished it March 7th, and I gave it 5 stars. This one was about her early adult years while she was working for the Forest Service here in the small town I live in Northern California. And it was interesting. Well, not only did she talk about her personal life and her struggle in looking for love in all the wrong places, but also she talked about the things that she went through as an employee of the Forest Service, and I learned a lot about what Forest Service work is like. Instead of working in a clerical job, which she originally had, she asked for a promotion to an outdoors job where she was involved in the planting of trees. So I thought it was a really beautiful memoir that educated me, and I really appreciated it. I like her writing style because she does get a little bit too technical for me at times. You know, there's a few things that were sort of over my head regarding the kind of work that she did and the laws that were involved in working for the Forest Service. But then at the same time, I could connect with her because she was a woman and trying to do a woman's work in a man's world. So struggles with the people that she worked with and also with her personal life. So I just want to thank you for listening to this, and I will get on with trying to do my other 2 videos that I should have done already. I haven't really been feeling up to it lately. It's just too much stuff going on in my life because I moved my trailer. I got my trailer moved back onto my property, and you know, with every move there is a lot of things that are going on as far as getting used to your new environment. I'm really glad to be back on my property and out of the RV park. So talk to you later.